Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing a review of The Judging Eye by R Scott Bakker. Now there will be minor spoilers potentially for the original trilogy, so if you haven't read the original trilogy and you want to go into it completely knowing nothing, then I would recommend not watching this review. The only thing that I will spoil is potential characters from the original trilogy still basically existing in the second quartet. So if you want to know nothing about who survives in the original Prince of Nothing trilogy, basically just don't watch this video. The Judging Eye. So this is the first book in the Aspect Emperor Quartet, and I wasn't planning to read this book in 2022. I was actually planning to read it in 2023, but I was craving some Bakker. I was craving something really dark, and when I think of really dark fantasy, I think of Bakker, and so I thought, let's pick it up. And boy, oh boy, did I absolutely love every single thing about this book. This to me, it's my favorite Bakker book to date. I liked it slightly more than The Warrior Prophet because I feel like it did certain things better than any of the other books that he's written up until this point. And I think because I wasn't really knowing what to expect, so I kind of just went in with like fairly low expectations, that it completely blew every single expectation out of the water. So what did I love about it? I'm not going to do a plot summary or anything like that. We're basically following on from the events of the original trilogy. I don't want to go into more detail. If you're watching this review, you probably already read the original trilogy and potentially have even read this book. So I don't want to like go too deep into it. I love that we kind of get these reflections from the characters about the previous events of what's happened in Prince of Nothing. You know, I particularly loved Achamian's reflections and Esmenet's reflections. I just love the fact that, you know, with Esmenet, she even kind of admits it herself that she's so surprised that, you know, this prostitute essentially who was right at the bottom of the ladder, on the bottom rung of, not even on the ladder, she was like the shit under the ladder. She's been able to come up to this point where she is now arguably the second most powerful person in this world after Anna Callis. I found it really kind of satisfying to see her be there, to be in that role, and for her to kind of own it as well. The interesting thing about Esmenet, I love how I've just gone into characters. I didn't mean to do that, but here we go. I feel like this is going to be a little bit disordered, so just bear with me. The thing I love about Esmenet is that she's still Esmenet. We get a lot of this insecurity about how people perceive her and about whether they truly respect her given her background. And I thought that was really realistic. I thought it was a really good way of portraying this kind of deep-seated insecurity that I don't think she will ever get rid of, to be honest. I think she could be the most powerful person in this world and she would still feel that insecurity, because she's always had to fight. She's now at a point where she's in a role where she doesn't maybe have to fight in the same ways that she had to before, and yet she's still kind of got that mentality that she had when she was a prostitute. And I kind of love that for her. Kind of love that she hasn't forgotten who she is and that she's kind of constantly reminding herself that at any minute this could all go away, because that's a survivor's mentality. And if I had to describe Esmenet in one word, it's a survivor. And we still see elements of that, even though she's like right at the top of the ladder now. And Achamian I thought was interesting. You know, he's kind of this like bitter old man. I really like Achamian. I have a massive soft spot for Akka. Like I just feel for him a lot. Like I feel like he knows a lot more than maybe most people give him credit for. I feel like in this book we get an acknowledgement of that, which is great from other characters. But I feel like, at least in the original trilogy, we didn't really see the appreciation for Achamian from the other characters. And I feel like he's quite bitter because of that. And because, you know, he kind of said it all, right? He kind of said that, you know, Kellis, there's something not right about this guy. And he was absolutely right. He was absolutely right. And it's just super fascinating to read. I love the fact that we kind of just continue on, but time has passed. So we're getting these kind of unfiltered thoughts from these characters. It's quite refreshing and it's quite a nice way to kick off this quartet. The writing continues to be extremely stunning. I think Bakker has a real way with words. I think he has this wonderful way of almost being quite poetic in the way that he writes. It's almost quite historical as well. You feel like you're reading the history of a past time. And I know he was very heavily influenced by the Crusades, and you can definitely get elements of that. And I feel like his writing just gets better. I wouldn't say there's anything specific. I just think his writing is a lot tighter. His dialogue continues to still be incredibly impactful. For me, his dialogue is the best dialogue out there that I've read, because every word matters. I've said this before. I love like intentional writing, and Bakker is a very intentional writer. Every single word carries weight. Every single word has an impact, and there's like nuance packed into it, which I love. So the writing continues to be incredible. The pacing in this one was just perfect for me. It was perfect. I feel like Darkness That Comes Before was a bit slow. Warrior Prophet was like top notch. And then the third book, there were some really slow parts in that book, in my opinion. But this one, it was just paced perfectly. Like starting from the beginning where we're just kind of getting the lay of the land, to it then speeding up in places, and then to it kind of slowing down in places. Like, I just think he balanced it perfectly. I said this in one of my previous videos that for me, I read this book really quickly. I was planning to only read like a chapter a day, because Bakker for me is quite a dense writer. Not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that I have to read it a lot slower so that I can truly capture everything that he's writing. But I was just addicted. I was addicted. I was just so hooked that I just read it in a couple of days. And I think that's a testament to his writing and his ability. In terms of character, so I've already talked about Achamian and Esmenet a little bit at the start, but I really like to kind of see where they both ended up. They both almost kind of swapped positions in a way, with Esmenet being on the top and Achamian basically being exiled and just basically just being alone. It's kind of sad, but it is what it is. I hope Achamian gets a just end. I have a feeling that he will. Like, I really hope that we see a good ending for Achamian. I mean, I can't imagine seeing a good ending for anybody because it's Bakker, but you know what I mean. I just hope he gets justice served. So I'm going to talk about some new characters. Two main ones. I really like Mimara. So Mimara is the daughter of Esmenet before she and Callus basically got together. She had her when she was a prostitute and she was very young, and she basically gave her away because she couldn't provide for her. We don't know who the father is at this point. I just really like this kind of duo that we have in Achamian and Mimara. I like their kind of partnership. I did think it was a little bit weird that they ended up together at the start of the book. I didn't really like that, to be honest, but I can also understand why the author did it. So I'm not going to hold it against him by any means. The Mimara is an interesting character because, you know, she kind of has this ability that we're just learning about, which is the judging eye ability. And she, from what I can sense right now, is that she has this ability to kind of see the almost like the deepest parts of people. And she's able to kind of unlock the layers of an individual's self or soul almost. And it's quite fascinating because we see her have these moments, and it kind of reveals some interesting things that I'm not going to go into right now because I don't want to spoil it too much. But Mimara's fun. Like, I like her. She's got a bit of a chip on her shoulder in the sense that obviously her and her mum don't have a good relationship at all, because her mum gave her away and she hasn't forgiven her for that. But then she's also a princess. She's, you know, obviously a part of the Kellus family, even though she is a bastard, but she's still a noble woman and she still has a place in that family. And so she has a lot of privilege. And she almost shuns that privilege. She almost looks down on that privilege. And that's exemplified by the fact that she actually becomes a prostitute herself. And it's like she does it on purpose just to kind of wind up her mum and wind up her family. So it's really interesting. She's a very complex character, like all characters in Bakker's world. But I'm really curious to see where her arc ends up, because she's got a lot of really interesting things going for her at the moment. The other character that I'm going to mention is literally the best character I've ever read. I guarantee you he will be on my top 10 character list this year, and that is Kelmomus. I'm just going to call him Kel. Oh man, being in his head was so satisfying. He is the most messed up individual I have ever read, and he's a child. He's like, what, 6 years old, 5 years old, I think. He's young, he's a child. He's just so twisted. He's so twisted. Kel is Anasarimba Kellus's and Esmenet's son. I think he's the youngest, or he's like the second youngest. And it's just, he's just such a twisted little person. And it's just super, super satisfying to read what is going on in his head. It's very, very disconcerting, for sure. But it's so interesting. It's so interesting. The bit with Samamas, I'm not going to mention what happens because I don't want to spoil it, but there is one bit where something happens with Samamas, and I was literally shouting at the page, don't let this happen, don't let this happen, don't let this happen. And it happened, and it happened. Baker went there, and I literally had to drop my book on my floor, and I stood there for like 10 minutes, or I sat there for like 10 minutes, just being like, how could anybody do this? Oh God, it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal, but I loved it. I loved it. I loved being in his head. And he's my favorite character right now in this entire world, even more so than Naya, which is saying something, because there is something deeply insidious about this boy that I just find fascinating. I just find it absolutely fascinating, and I cannot wait to see where his story goes. So Kel had to be mentioned. A few more things that I'll mention because I don't want this review to go on too long. But the world building is top notch. There's a battle scene in this one. I love his battle scenes. Baker writes battle scenes incredibly vividly. You feel like you're on the ground. I feel like if you gave me a camera and some actors, I could probably direct the scene pretty well. Not because I'm a good director, because I'm not, but because he writes the scene so vividly that you could just follow the book pretty much line for line, and you'd be able to kind of showcase it on the screen pretty effectively. It's just fantastic. The tone continues to remain really dark and gritty. I feel like this book is maybe a little bit more insular, if that makes sense. I feel like the Prince of Nothing trilogy, you have kind of two worldviews. You have the outer worldview of everything that's happening in this broader landscape, and then you have the individual worldviews of each of these characters and their position in the story. But I feel like with this one, and I'm curious as to whether this will continue, I feel like it's very insular in general. We do have obviously this sense of what is happening more broadly over the world, but it's much more driven by the characters, if that makes sense. It's much more driven by the kind of different POVs that we follow. We don't really have like the third party perspective bits as much. And I quite like that. I kind of like the fact that we've gone from this like broader view to this very insular view of what's happening. It feels a lot more intimate. It feels a lot more like we're on the ground with the characters every single step of the way. Whereas I felt like in the Prince of Nothing trilogy, I would often be taken out of the narrative because we have that third party perspective view almost. But I prefer this, to be honest. Like I prefer just kind of getting it from each different POV, because then you're kind of questioning, okay, like whose side is actually the right side. And I really kind of like that dilemma that the reader was presented with. It's super satisfying to read. Just everything worked. Like this book to me was flawless. I gave it a 5 stars. I would give it a million stars if I could. It was just absolutely perfect. And I'm not exaggerating. Like everything about it just worked perfectly. The downside of that is that you're concerned then as to whether the next books are going to be able to kind of keep up with it. I'm about halfway through the White Luck Warrior right now, and I have to say this one, The Judging Eye, is for me was just quite a bit better than the White Luck Warrior, at least where I am right now. That's not to say that the White Luck Warrior is bad. It's absolutely phenomenal. Just in terms of Baker though, like Judging Eye is like absolutely top notch, and I'm just curious as to whether any of the following books are going to be able to match it or even beat it in terms of execution and just general sentiment. Before I end this review, I am going to read a few quotes. I always do for Baker books because I just think he has so many quotable parts. And I've got quite a few. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think some of them are quite short though. So anyway, first quote. There are many fools, Sorba, men who conceive hearts in simple terms, absolute terms. They are insensible to the war within, so they scoff at it. They puff out their chests and they pretend. When fear and despair overcome them, as they must overcome us all, they have not the wind to think, and so they break. So good. I'm going to take the tabs off as I go through. All right, next. Power, she had come to realise, had the insidious habit of inserting others between you and your tasks, rendering your limbs little more than decorative mementos of a more human past. Her only organs remaining, it sometimes seemed, were those belonging to statecraft, a tongue attached to a devious soul. So good. The most important question you ask any man-child is the question of his origin. Only by knowing what a man has been can you hope to say that he will be. Lots of philosophy in this one, but not as much as I think as the previous books, to be honest. But this one I really liked because I think Baker just does descriptions really well. of like giving you a sense of like the world. And I really like this quote because it kind of just gives you a feel for the world. That was really ineloquently said, but there we go. Achamian had almost forgotten what it was like, watching men about their fires, the arms folded against the chill, the mouths smiling, laughing, tongue and teeth peeking in and out of the firelight. The gazes hopping from face to face within the cage of camaraderie, only to return to the furnace coals during the inevitable lulls. At first it struck him as something fearful, as exposing of what humans do when they turn their backs to the world. Their inferiority laid bare to the vaults of dark infinity, cracked open like oysters, with no will save a warlike nature. But as the moments passed, he found the sight more and more affecting, to the point of feeling old and maudlin, that in a place so vast and so dark, creatures this frail would dare gather about sparks called light. Really good. All right, a few more. Where two reasons may deliver truth, 1,000 lead to certain delusion. The more steps you take, the more likely you will wander astray. This is such a good quote. I was actually reading an article about like companies, because I'm in the process of like starting my own company. One of the things is like how quickly you make decisions. And this one was, I was reading this as I was like reflecting on like the culture I want in my team. And it was just so on the nose. It was just like, I was like, yeah, I agree. That's why you have to like make decisions fast. Anyway, all right. So he came to realize that learning a language was perhaps the most profound thing a man could do. Not only did it require wrapping different sounds around the very movement of your soul, it involved learning things somehow already known, as though much of what he was somehow existed apart from him. A kind of enlightenment accompanied these first lessons, a deeper understanding of the self. All right, last two. To be a student required a particular kind of capitulation, a willingness not simply to do as one was told, but to surrender the movement of one's soul to the unknown complexities of another's. A willingness not simply to be moved, but to be remade. Oh, I love that quote so much because I literally could not agree more with it. All right, last one. They speak more to their terror than to one another, she realizes. Ever do men play the mummer, strutting on the stage of themselves to avoid the parts the world has assigned them. Women would speak of their fear. And that's it. I hope you enjoy the review, folks. I have had quite a few people asking me about when this review would come out, so definitely comment and let me know your thoughts. Sorry, one of my tabs came off my book, so I'm just putting it back in. But let me know, you know, obviously your thoughts. But I loved everything about this book. It was perfect. And honestly, I would recommend just reading the Prince of Nothing trilogy just to get to this book so that you can appreciate the masterclass that it is in how to write a book, full stop. The Prince of Nothing trilogy is incredible in itself, but this for me was just absolutely astounding. Easiest 5 stars I've ever given. So hope you like the review, folks. I will see you down in the comments below. Stay safe as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.